August 12, 1945. Kirtland Field, New Mexico. The desert evening is still hot, the sky a deep violet smudged with leftover dust from the day when the truck doors slam and the guards shift their rifles up a little higher. No one speaks. Nobody needs to. The men in olive drab already know what is inside the armored convoy that has just rolled up to the fenced floodlit building the paperwork calls Z Unit. Inside, the air smells of warm metal oil and sweat. Two officers stand over a cleared workbench, a single lamp hanging low, throwing hard shadows over a set of crates marked with stenciled codes that mean nothing to anyone who is not part of this small, strange war. Major Charles Rhea, United States Army Air Forces, wipes his palms on his trousers and tries not to stare too long at the lead container being eased down with almost ceremonial care. You would not guess, looking at that dull gray assembly, that it is meant to tear a city apart. It looks like something from a machine shop, not a weapon that might end an empire in a flash of white light. An MP checks the manifest with a clipboard that trembles slightly in his hands. Component package from Los Alamos, sir, as ordered. Rhea gives a curt nod. He has done this twice already, though neither time here in this particular building. Once for the device tested in the New Mexico desert. Once more for the bomb that went into the belly of a B-29 over Nagasaki only 3 days ago. He tells himself that repetition makes this easier. It does not. All right, he says quietly. Get it inside. Doors sealed as soon as the last crate is through. The steel doors grind shut behind the convoy. Outside, the base settles back into the uneasy calm of an America that has just learned what it can do to a city with a single bomb. Inside, in this guarded windowless room, a third weapon is beginning to take shape. On a rough map tacked to the wall, 2 cities in Japan are circled in red pencil. Niigata, Tokyo. 1,000 miles away in Washington, D.C., it is already the early hours of August 13th. The White House is never entirely dark, but tonight there is a particular tension in the corridors. Reporters linger near telephones. Officers wait outside doors, caps in hand. Somewhere, a radio murmurs the latest bulletins from the Pacific, crackling with static and words like surrender, mediation, and ultimatum. In the Oval Office, President Harry S. Truman leans over his desk elbows on a spread of cables and memoranda. His glasses sit low on his nose, and the lamplight picks out the weariness in his face. A sheet from the War Department lies near his right hand, the ink still fresh. It lists expected readiness, dates for additional special bombs, and proposed target options should Japan refuse to yield. Tokyo, Niigata. He hears the words again as General George Marshall speaks, voice measured, almost patient. We can have another device ready for operational use within days, Mr. President. A week at most. The air crews on Tinian know the procedure now. Weather permitting, there will be no difficulty in delivering it. Truman nods, but he does not immediately answer. He has seen the photographs from Hiroshima. Grainy aerial shots that show a city flattened into a pale smear, punctuated by the black stumps of ruined structures. Reports are still incomplete, the numbers uncertain, but every page speaks of something that feels larger than casualty. Tables and tonnage dropped. Nagasaki came next, almost before the world had taken in the first devastation. Another city, another flash, another mushroom cloud boiling up into the sky. Now his military advisors are telling him there is a third. Another fat man type, they say, though the jargon feels grotesquely small for what it means. A third chance to force a surrender, or to show unmistakably that the United States can keep doing this until no Japanese city remains unscarred. Truman lifts his gaze from the papers. Where would you hit next? He asks. Marshall does not hesitate. That is not his job. Niigata would be a logical choice, sir. Significant industrial facilities, port installations, and it has not yet been heavily bombed. Alternatively, we could consider Tokyo again. The psychological impact of another atomic strike on the capital would be immense. Tokyo, already battered by months of firebombing, hundreds of thousands dead, neighborhoods erased in waves of ordinary high explosive and incendiaries. It is a city that has lived with the nightly possibility of annihilation long before anyone heard the word atomic. Niigata. A quieter name far to the north on the Sea of Japan with its oil storage tanks, industrial sites and shipyards. A place few Americans could point to on a map, but one that now finds itself in the crosshairs of a new kind of war planning. Back at Kirtland Field, the men in coveralls and white lab coats begin unpacking the crates. Each component is checked against lists that have been rehearsed and memorized. Steel shells, explosive lenses, detonators that must function with exquisite precision, all of it leading toward a moment that can never be taken back once the bomb is assembled, armed, and released. One of the technicians paws his hands, hovering over a padded container that holds part of the bomb's intricate heart. "Think they'll really use this one too?" he mutters, not quite to anyone. Captain Lewis, standing nearby with a clipboard of his own answers without looking up. "It isn't our decision. But of course every man in the room knows that is only half true. Their work, their signatures on forms and careful alignments of circuits bring the decision closer to reality with every passing hour. If you are standing there watching the pieces come together, you might feel it in your stomach, a slow tightening as the shape in front of you becomes less like a pile of parts and more like something with a purpose. A dark, silent purpose that needs only altitude of Bombay and a target name spoken over a crackling intercom. On the far side of the Pacific, in cities already shattered and in towns that still sleep uneasily in wooden houses, the people of Japan do not know that a third bomb has entered the world. They know only rumors, the strange new word Genbaku atomic bomb, and the whispered stories coming out of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In Washington, the president stares at the list of target cities, weighing the lives he cannot see. In New Mexico, under yellow electric light, men tighten bolts around a weapon that may or may not be used. Between them stretches an ocean, and over that ocean fly messages, orders, and warnings, all converging toward a single unanswered question. August 13th, 1945. Tinian Island, Pacific Ocean. Midday heat presses down on North Field until the runways shimmer like water. 4-engined B-29s sit in their revetments, engines quiet. For once their silver skins dulled with dust and salt. The air smells of hot rubber, spilled fuel, and the faint tang of the sea. In a low air-conditioned briefing hut, a short drive from the flight line, a group of officers hunch over a long table scattered with maps of Japan. Familiar cities stare up at them in faded ink and grease pencil. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Niigata. Colonel Paul Tibbets, commander of the 509th Composite Group, leans over the map, tapping a finger on the northern coast of Honshu. "Here," he says, "Niigata. The target planners say it still has its oil facilities and a good part of its industry intact. Not much point in hitting ruins." Across from him, a weather officer traces wind arrows along the Sea of Japan. "Prevailing winds generally offshore," he notes. "That'll blow most of the radioactive cloud away from the mainland. Fewer complications for follow-on operations." No one says it out loud, but they are all thinking the same thing. Fewer complications for the ground troops who might have to land on those shores later if there is no surrender. On a side table, a cable from Washington lies folded but not forgotten. It outlines the president's guidance in careful, cautious language. Continue air operations. Prepare for another special bomb when it becomes available. But there is something else between the lines now, something that was not there before Hiroshima. A sense that they are all standing in a place no one has charted, where every action will be judged in ways they cannot yet imagine. Tibbets straightens up and folds his arms. "Assume we get the word," he says. "Assume the third device is cleared for use. What is our timeline?" The operations officer, Major Bill Spanky Wilkins, flips open his notebook. "Los Alamos says the next corps will be ready within days. It's already en route to Kirtland. From there it flies to us in components like the last one. We assemble in the pit. Once we have it, we can strike within 24 hours, subject to weather." He glances at a second sheet where the target list is typed in neat columns. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are already crossed out in red. Niigata stands near the top of the remaining primary targets, its name underlined. Beside it in pencil, someone has scribbled an alternative in the margin: Tokyo Area Rail Hub or Government District. He does not say who wrote that note. He does not need to. If the president wants impact real psychological shock, he might pick Tokyo proper. Wilkins continues, his voice deliberately neutral. Hit the capital again with the new device. Demonstrate that nowhere is safe. On the other hand, Tokyo's already been burned to the ground. From a pure bombing standpoint, Niigata gives us cleaner data on destructive effect. Data. It is a clinical word for what happens when a city vanishes in a roar of nuclear fire. Outside crews move between Quonset huts and mess halls, swapping rumors in low voices. They have heard that another bomb is coming. They have seen the photographs. Some of the Hiroshima crews brought back the pale circular scar in the middle of a once crowded city. They have listened to the stories of heat so intense that shadows were burned into concrete. No one knows which city will be next. Only that somewhere someone is deciding. Half a world away in a long, shaded room inside the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, the debate has taken on a very different tone. The walls are lined with ministers, officers, and aides, their faces drawn and damp in the humid August air. At the center of the room, seated on a slightly raised dais, is Emperor Hirohito, small and still in his formal uniform. The previous night, he has already done something no Japanese emperor has ever done before. He has spoken directly into the bitter, chaotic argument of his ministers and chosen a side. Surrender. Accept the Allied terms with a single condition: that the imperial institution be preserved. Now on August 13th, they are arguing the details, the timing, the wording of the answer to the latest Allied note. Some still resist. Army hardliners speak of honor, of one last decisive battle on the beaches and in the cities of a nation in uniform rising to meet the invader. They talk of casualties of 1 million or more, as if numbers can be measured against something called spirit. But others in the room have read the reports from Hiroshima. They have watched the map pins disappear from the home islands one by one. They know that conventional bombing has already chewed the country into pieces, and that the Soviet Union has now entered the war in Manchuria, rolling over the Kwantung Army that was meant to be Japan's shield in the north. The Genbaku has changed something fundamental. The American president has unleashed a bomb that in a single instant can obliterate a city. And according to intercepted radio traffic and intelligence reports, he may have more. As the argument rises and falls, as tempers flare and voices tremble with exhaustion, few in that room are thinking about Niigata specifically. They are thinking about Japan as a whole, about the possibility that any city could be next, the capital itself included. In the White House, Truman listens to another briefing on Japanese responses. Some indications of willingness to surrender, his advisors say, but the language is evasive, conditional. The Japanese insist on the emperor's prerogatives. The Allies insist on their own terms. It is a negotiation conducted in formal notes, while bombs continue to fall and ships continue to sail. General Leslie Groves. The hard-driving head of the Manhattan Project sits stiff-backed in one of the chairs near the wall. He clears his throat. Mr. President, I must stress that while additional bombs are becoming available, they will not be ready in large numbers for some time. The next weapon is nearly complete. After that, production slows. Every device we use now is significant. The statement hangs in the air. One more bomb ready soon, perhaps another a few weeks later. This is not an endless arsenal. It is a limited handful of thunderbolts, each to be thrown with deliberation. Truman nods slowly. Then we will hold it in reserve, he says at last, more to himself than to the room. Plan as if we must use it. Pray that we do not. Yet even as he speaks on Tinian, the target maps are being updated. Flight crews are staying sharp, and in New Mexico, a team of men in a windowless building continues its careful, meticulous work on a weapon that does not yet know its destination. August 14, 1945, Los Alamos, New Mexico. In a laboratory perched on the edge of the New Mexican mesas, the air hums with a peculiar quiet. The frantic pace of July has eased, but not by much. The Trinity test is nearly a month behind them, Nagasaki only days, and yet the blackboard at the front of the room is still crowded with symbols, figures, and neat columns labeled simply Device 1, Device 2, Device 3. Dr. Robert Oppenheimer stands near a window, cigarette cupped in his hand, watching heat ripples blur the distant mountains. On the table behind him, a small group of physicists and engineers argue in low, tight voices over figures in a notebook. They speak of yields, firing circuits, and the exact timing of explosive lenses, but the unspoken subject is the same that haunts every room in the project now. How many more will there be? A clerk appears in the doorway, hat in his hands. "Telegram from Washington, sir," he says, eyes flicking nervously over the faces in the room. Oppenheimer takes the message, unfolding it with fingers stained faintly yellow from tobacco and graphite dust. The language is dry military, but the meaning is clear enough. Third Corps nearly ready. Shipment proceeding according to schedule. Prepare further units as material becomes available. He reads it twice, then sets it down beside the notebook. "It seems," he says quietly, "that our work is not yet finished." No one answers for a moment. They all know what is being prepared out there in the desert, far from these blackboards and calculations. A plutonium core only slightly different in its fine details from the one that destroyed Nagasaki is either already at Kirtland or very nearly on its way. One of the younger scientists, his voice unsteady, breaks the silence. "Do they really intend to keep dropping them one after another?" Oppenheimer exhales smoke curling in the still air. "I do not know," he replies, though a part of him suspects that he does. That decision lies with men whose business is war. Ours has been to show what is possible. He wonders if that answer will satisfy him in the years to come. At Kirtland Field, the answer is taking the shape of metal and high explosive. In the secure assembly building, technicians continue their careful work. Bolts are torqued circuits, tested timing, checked and rechecked. The bomb casing, squat and olive green, waits on a cradle open like a shellfish whose deadly pearl has not yet been inserted. A courier from Los Alamos arrives with another shipment escorted by armed guards. Inside the small, heavy container they carry is the refined heart of the weapon, so innocuous in appearance that a layman would barely glance at it. To the men in this room, it might as well be a live creature. Captain Lewis signs for the delivery, his pen leaving a small tremor of ink on the manifest. "Third one," the courier says softly as the container changes hands. "Better hope the brass in Washington makes up its mind before you finish tying this together." Lewis gives a short, humorless chuckle. "They always do," he says, "one way or another. On Tinian, that decision is already being planned for as if it is inevitable. In the operations hut of the 509th, a fresh sheet of paper has been pinned to the wall. Across the top in block letters, someone has written, "Special Mission 3 Tentative." Beneath it, proposed dates are sketched in pencil. August 17th, August 19th. Notes in the margin refer to bomb readiness, fuel loads, likely route and weather. Major Wilkins runs his finger along the line that marks the path from Tinian up toward northern Honshu, skirting the worst of the known flak zones. "If we draw Niigata," he says, "we come in from the southwest climb, to bombing altitude over the Sea of Japan, then turn onto final approach. Same drill, just a different city down there." A pilot listening nearby snorts softly. "Different city, same ending," he mutters. No one bothers to correct him. Outside, a weather plane returns from another reconnaissance flight over Japan. Its cameras hold strips of coastline cloud formations and the faint, gray smudges of cities seen from high above. A technician in the photo lab circles a cluster of buildings on the northern coast with a greased pencil. Niigata. The port is still there. Storage tanks still stand. Smoke from conventional raids curls from some districts, but nothing like the blackened, flattened moonscapes that now mark Tokyo and Osaka. In Tokyo itself, the situation swings wildly between fragile hope and looming catastrophe. The night of August 14th descends heavy and humid over the Imperial Palace. Inside, a phonograph recording session has just captured the Emperor's voice, thin and formal, reading the surrender rescript that will soon be broadcast to the nation. It speaks of enduring the unendurable and of accepting the Allied proclamation. But not everyone is willing to endorse it. In darkened corridors and cluttered offices, a handful of army officers whisper of honor and betrayal. They talk of seizing the palace, of stopping the broadcast, of forcing the government to fight on. Some speak as if a single act of will could reverse the tide of war, could somehow keep the Americans from dropping another of their terrible new bombs. They do not know how close that third weapon already is to being finished. While conspirators search for the record that holds the Emperor's surrender speech groping through cabinets in the dim light thousands of feet away above the Pacific, AB-29 navigates by starlight, carrying messages between commands. Radio traffic crackles from ship to ship, base to base. Words like surrender, unconditional, and atomic weave through the static. In Washington, Truman receives word that the Japanese have indicated acceptance of the Allied terms subject to clarification regarding the Emperor. It is not yet over. The diplomats are still arguing over phrases, notes still shuttling via neutral governments. But the shape of the end is now visible. Still, he does not give any order to stand down the third bomb. Not yet. Until they formally accept, we must assume hostilities continue, Marshall reminds him. The mere possibility of another strike may help focus their thinking, Mr. President. Truman looks again at the status reports on his desk. One weapon used on Hiroshima, one on Nagasaki, a third nearly ready. Beyond that production curves, estimates numbers trailing off into the months ahead. He rubs his eyes behind his glasses. Somewhere in New Mexico, men he has never met are finishing work that might make his next decision both easier and harder at the same time. In the next 48 hours, everything will depend on who moves faster. The diplomats trying to end the war or the machinery of planning and assembly that is bringing a third atomic bomb closer to the bomb bay of a waiting aircraft. August 14, 1945. Tokyo, just before midnight. Rain spits fitfully against the tiled roofs of the Imperial Palace complex, a thin curtain that does nothing to clear the heavy August air. Inside the darkened corridors, electric bulbs burn low behind paper shades. Shadows gather in the corners like listening figures. In one of the palace offices, Captain Takeo Sasaki grips the phone so tightly the cord creaks. His voice is a harsh whisper. Tonight. It must be tonight. Once that broadcast goes out, it is finished. The people will hear surrender from His Majesty's own lips. On the other end of the line, another officer answers equally tense. We take the palace, secure the studios, find the record. The Eastern Army can still be brought over. If we act quickly, we can preserve the Kokutai. The Americans will back down if we show resolve. No one mentions the atomic bomb by name, but it hangs over their words like a storm cloud. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Rumors of a third new weapon waiting somewhere across the ocean. For these desperate officers, it is proof of the enemy's ruthlessness and of the leadership's weakness. For them, surrender is worse than destruction. They do not know that at this very moment, half a world away, men in New Mexico are putting the finishing touches on a device designed to turn a city into ash. At Kirtland Field, under harsh white lights, the bomb casing is now almost complete. The technicians move with the slow, deliberate motions of men who have rehearsed every step dozens of times. Firing circuit check, one calls out. Firing circuit check, aye, another responds, eyes on a row of instruments. Tiny needles twitch, then settle. The bomb suspended in its cradle is still just a machine, dormant and cold. But now, every major component is in place. All that is missing is the core, the carefully machined heart of plutonium that will make the whole assembly something entirely different. A courier plane waits on a nearby strip, engines cooling in the night air, ready for the next leg of the journey that began at Los Alamos, will pass through this field and end on the coral runways of Tinian. In the operations hut on Tinian, the air is thick with cigarette smoke and anticipation. A fresh weather report lies on the table pinned under a coffee mug. The forecast for the coming week over northern Honshu looks workable. Broken cloud layers, scattered showers, but enough clear gaps at bombing altitude. Colonel Tibbets studies the chart in silence. Beside it, the sheet marked Special Mission. 3 tentative has been updated with a more definite note. Not before 19th of August. Coordination with naval units in area. Targets under consideration: Niigata, Tokyo, metropolitan rail and government districts. A navigator taps his pencil on the map. If Tokyo is chosen again, we will have to adjust for the burned-out areas. Less to destroy that has not already been hit. Niigata gives us a more intact pattern: port facilities, oil tanks, shipyards. Tibbets nods slowly. Either way, the procedure is the same, he says. We brief, we fly, we drop, we document. Let the politicians and generals argue about consequences. Our job is to be precise. Yet even as he speaks, some part of him knows that this third mission, if it happens, will not be like the others. The first atomic strike was a leap into the unknown. The second proved it was no accident. A third will feel like something else again. Policy, not experiment. Routine, not shock. Back in Tokyo, the clock inches toward dawn. Inside the palace, the plotters move into action. Units loyal to their cause are ordered toward the compound. Telephone lines crackle with confused commands. In a dim corridor, an officer confronts a member of the Imperial Guard, eyes bright with fanaticism. We act in the name of His Majesty. He insists. We must prevent this humiliation, no matter the cost. But not everyone bends. Some guards refuse to join the coup. One general, awoken in the small hours and confronted with the desperate scheme, stares at his visitors with cold fury. You would drag the emperor into your madness, he says. You would risk his person to continue a hopeless war. I will not permit it. The coup staggers, hesitates, begins to unravel. The conspirators search frantically for the phonograph recordings of the surrender rescript stored in a small room deep within the palace. But the building is a maze, and the guards loyal to the government quietly spirit the precious discs to safety. Time bleeds away. August 14th, 1945. Afternoon, Washington, D.C. In the cabinet room, Truman sits at the head of the long table, a cable from the State Department in his hand. The Japanese have accepted the Allied terms with the clarification that the Emperor's position will be subject to the authority of the Supreme Commander. The wording has been parsed, debated, and finally judged as an acceptance of unconditional surrender in substance, if not in every syllable. Secretary of State James Burns leans forward. Mr. President, this is the answer we have been waiting for. They have agreed to lay down their arms under our conditions. General Marshall nods, once face grave but relieved. Then hostilities can be brought to an end as soon as we issue the appropriate orders. Truman lays the cable down carefully as if it was something fragile. All right, he says. Let us make it plain. We accept their surrender. No more bombing. I do not want another city hit with one of those things. He looks to Marshall and to Secretary of War Henry Stimson. And the Special Weapons General. There will be no more use of them without my explicit approval. Inform General Groves, inform the theater commanders, the third bomb is not to be used now. A clerk scribbles frantically, turning the President's words into formal orders that will ripple outward through the military machine. Somewhere in that chain of transmission, the path of the third bomb begins to kink and sag, the straight line from laboratory to assembly building to bomb bay, bending away from its intended end. The meeting continues. Plans are made for a public announcement for occupation policy, for demobilization. But for a moment, Truman's mind drifts back to the photographs from Hiroshima stacked in a folder in his desk. There will be no second Hiroshima in Niigata, no third atomic cloud boiling up over Tokyo. Not now. Not if this surrender holds. Night deepens in Tokyo. The coup collapses under its own confusion and the quiet resistance of officers who still see their duty as obedience to the Emperor's will. Some conspirators take their own lives. Others are arrested as the first pale light of August 15th seeps into the sky. In a small, secure room in the palace, the phonograph discs remain intact, guarded by men who understand that the fate of millions rides on a few grooves of lacquer. The surrender broadcast will go out. The war, at least on paper, will end. On Tinian, the men of the 509th go to sleep amid rumors that something has shifted. No official word, yet just a sense in the air that the endless cycle of missions briefings and maintenance might soon come to a different kind of halt. At Kirtland, the technicians close up the assembly building for the night. The almost complete bomb rests in its cradle, a monster kept on a short leash waiting for an order that has just begun to fade before it can be spoken. August 15th, 1945. Tokyo, late morning. At exactly noon, as church bells ring across Allied cities half a world away, radios crackle to life in homes, barracks, and air raid shelters throughout Japan. People huddle close, straining to hear over the static. The announcer's voice is formal, trembling. Then, for the first time in history, the voice of the emperor reaches his people. The language is courtly and indirect, speaking of a new and most cruel bomb, and of the need to pave the way for a grand peace for all generations to come. Few civilians understand every archaic phrase, but they hear enough. The war is ending. Surrender. In Niigata, the words filter through open windows of wooden houses and small workshops. Dock workers pause on the pier's hands, still on ropes and cargo hooks. Some fall to their knees, others stare blankly at the gray water of the harbor. They do not know how close their city came to becoming the next Hiroshima, to vanishing in an instant of white light and roaring fire. Children run through streets that remain for now entirely solid. The oil tanks on the edge of the port stand where they did yesterday. The shipyards are scarred by conventional raids, but still recognizable as shipyards not as cratered wasteland. Above them, the sky is an ordinary summer blue. No contrails, no B-29s, no distant approaching rumble. August 15th, 1945. Tinian, North Field. The announcement reaches the island in the early hours local time. In a mess hall still smelling of powdered eggs and burnt coffee, a sergeant reads the bulletin off a sheet of flimsy paper tacked to the wall. "Japan has accepted our terms," he says, half incredulous. "They are calling it VJ Day. The war is over." A cheer goes up, ragged but real. Some men whoop and pound each other on the back. Others just sit down abruptly as if their legs have given out. A radio in the corner blares American voices, shouting, singing, weeping. Somewhere, a single shot cracks skyward as a pistol is fired in celebration before an officer snaps at the culprit to knock it off. In the operations hut of the 509th, the mood is stranger, more complicated. Major Wilkins stands in front of the map wall eyes on the sheet that still reads, "Special Mission, 3 tentative." Someone has written in thick pencil across it, "Cancelled." Tibbets walks in cap under his arm, the humid air sticking his shirt to his back. He follows Wilkins' gaze and lets out a slow breath. "So that is it," he says. "We trained for a mission that will not fly." A navigator, one of the men who would have sat hunched over charts on the long haul to Niigata or Tokyo, breaks the quiet with a lopsided grin. "Not often you get to be glad a mission got scrubbed before it was even scheduled, sir." Wilkins taps the cancelled sheet. "Think they would really have picked Niigata?" the navigator asks. Wilkins shrugs. "Weather politics symbolism, too many variables. Tokyo was always there as an option, but now it is academic. They all know that it is more than academic. Somewhere in a hangar or in an assembly pit that was built in secret just for them, there would have been another squat, ugly bomb waiting for its core. Another briefing. Another crew told that they were about to rewrite history. Instead, there is a blank space where those events might have gone. A gap in the war's final terrible weeks. August 15th, 1945. Kirtland Field, New Mexico. The news reaches the assembly building through a chain of rumors that become fact when an officer arrives with a typed order in his hand. The technicians look up from their work as Captain Lewis gathers them near the bomb cradle. His voice is steady, but there is something new in it. Something like release. "Gentlemen, I have just received orders from higher authority," he says. "Japan has agreed to surrender. The war in the Pacific is ending. Effective immediately assembly of this device is to be halted. The core will be secured under separate custody. The casing will remain here, under guard, until further instructions." For a moment, no one quite reacts. The bomb rests behind him, its olive-green skin dull under the fluorescence wiring, exposed explosive lenses not yet fully seated. It looks oddly unfinished, like a thought that has not yet become a sentence. One of the technicians lets out a low whistle. "So we are just going to leave it like that," he says. Lewis glances back at the weapon, then nods. "That is right. We stand it down. This one does not fly." Someone laughs short and sharp, more from nerves than humor. Another man simply leans against a workbench, head bowed, shoulders shaking with silent relief. In a small office down the hall, a safe is opened and a compact metal sphere wrapped in layers of shielding is carefully placed inside. This plutonium core, machined and polished to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, will not be mated to its shell today. Its path, which seemed so straight just a few days ago, has veered into uncertainty. August 16th, 1945, Los Alamos. In a conference room with a view of the mesas, Oppenheimer listens as General Groves reads the official notification. Hostilities are effectively concluded. Groves says, "No immediate further use of the weapons is contemplated. Production will continue, but at a rate and for purposes to be determined." Around the table, the scientists shift in their seats. Some look relieved. Others look lost. They have been living at a sprint for years, racing a clock that has suddenly stopped. "So the third weapon will not be used," one of them says. Groves hesitates just for a heartbeat. "Not at present," he answers. "It will be placed in reserve, along with any subsequent devices. Policy regarding their deployment is now a matter for the highest levels of government." Oppenheimer stares at the tabletop fingers tracing the grain of the wood. In his mind's eye, he sees Hiroshima as he has seen it in photographs, Nagasaki as a column of cloud. And now, a third ghost city that does not exist, a phantom crater where Niigata or Tokyo might have been. "We have proved the point," he murmurs. Twice. The others hear him, but no one quite knows how to respond. Ontinian crews who had been living under strictest secrecy drift toward the beaches, some stripping off boots and shirts to wade into the Pacific, laughing with the brittle, exhausted relief of men who have survived something they are only beginning to understand. They talk about going home, about states and towns and jobs that suddenly feel real again. But every now and then the conversation circles back to the weapons. "How many more do you think they will build?" a gunner asks, staring out at the glittering surface of the sea. His friend skips a stone across the waves, watching the ripples spread. "Enough," he says quietly. "More than enough." In Niigata, fishermen push their boats out into the harbor. At dawn on the 16th, the sky streaked pink over an intact shoreline. In Tokyo, survivors pick their way through districts already burned by earlier raids, contemplating rebuilding instead of total obliteration. The third bomb exists now in a strange in-between state. Real but unused. Assembled in part, disassembled in part. Ready in theory, but with no target, no mission number, no date written beneath its name. It is a weapon waiting for a future decision born in a war that has ended a fraction of a second before it could be unleashed. Late August 1945, Washington, D.C. The summer heat lingers in the capital, heavy and damp, but something in the atmosphere has changed. The city is noisy with parades, newspaper extras, and the raw, chaotic joy of victory. Bands play in parks. Strangers hug on sidewalks. Inside the White House, behind closed doors where the cheering does not quite reach the mood, is quieter. Truman sits in the Oval Office with a fresh report from General Groves in his hand. It is terse, businesslike. Status of special weapons. Material on hand. Expected production. A single line notes that the third bomb assembly has been halted, the core placed in secure storage. He reads that line twice. The words are small, but the weight behind them is not. Stimson sits opposite, older and visibly worn by the strain of the past months. "Mr. President," he says, "history will argue for years about whether Hiroshima and Nagasaki were necessary. It may argue even more about whether we would have used a third bomb if the Japanese had not yielded." Truman sets the paper down. Through the window he can hear the faint echo of distant cheering from Pennsylvania Avenue. "They surrendered when they did," he says. "That is the fact we have. I meant what I said. I do not want another one of those things dropped." He taps the report with a forefinger. "But they exist now. We cannot pretend they do not. The third bomb and all the ones that will follow. We have opened a door, Henry. I'm not sure anyone knows how to close it again." Stimson nods slowly. "Then perhaps," he replies, "we must learn how to live with it open." In that quiet exchange, the third bomb shivers in meaning. No longer a tactical option for ending a specific war, it becomes something else. A reserve, a threat, a piece of leverage in a world that has just seen what two of its kind can do. Early September 1945. Kirtland Field, New Mexico. The assembly building is calmer now. The rush is gone. The armed guards are still there, but their shoulders seem less tight, their eyes less haunted. Crates that once held bomb components are stacked neatly waiting for shipment back to depots and laboratories. The unfinished casing sits off to one side, partly shrouded with a canvas tarp. Dust has begun to gather along its seams. The men who built it walk past without quite looking at it the way people walk past a grave they do not want to think too much about. Captain Lewis signs off on a transfer form, his pen scratching quietly. A truck is being loaded outside, bound for a storage facility where this shell will be stripped, studied perhaps, used as a training aid. It will never feel the wind at 10,000 meters, never tumble free of a bomb bay toward a city. He lingers for a moment by the cradle where it once rested. "You were supposed to be Niigata," he murmurs under his breath. "Or Tokyo. Now you are just another crate." He is not sorry. At Los Alamos, the plutonium core that had been destined for that casing is no longer spoken of in terms of target dates. It acquires a different identity, one that will later be whispered about in the laboratories as simply the Demon Core. Used in experiments, involved in accidents, it will take its toll in another way on a much smaller scale, far from any city. But on this day, it sits in a safe, its surface cold, its future unwritten. Autumn cools the air over Japan. Leaves turn on hills that overlook cities in ruins and cities preserved. In Niigata, they repair windows shattered by conventional blasts, not shock waves from a nuclear fireball. Men climb ladders to patch roofs. Women scrub soot from walls. Children chase each other in alleys between houses that still stand unaware that their town had once been surrounded by a pencil circle on a map in a room thousands of miles away. Sometimes they look up as American planes pass far above flying reconnaissance or supply missions. The contrails curl in the sky thin and harmless. In Tokyo, where so much has already been burned, the knowledge that it could have been worse does not come all at once. It seeps in over months and years through newspaper articles, post-war memoirs, and the gradual declassification of documents. At first, people are only dimly aware that there was a third weapon at all. Decades later, scholars will argue about the exact schedule, about whether Niigata or Tokyo was truly next in line, about how close the bomb was to being ready to fly. They will study Truman's diary entries. The Target Committee reports the shipping logs that tracked the Corps' journey. They will reconstruct dates and timetables and speak confidently of what would have happened on August 19th or 20th if events had taken a slightly different turn. But for the men who lived it, the memory is not numbers on a chart. For Tibbets back in the United States, the thought of a third mission lingers like an echo. He knows how easily the order might have come, how readily his crews would have saddled up for Niigata or for another run at Tokyo. He also knows that the order did not come, that the war ended in the narrow gap between bombs 2 and 3. For Oppenheimer, standing on a windy hillside years later, the words he quoted from Scripture after Trinity still hang over everything, becoming death destroyer of worlds. He thinks perhaps that the third bomb marks the moment when the atomic weapon stopped being a desperate measure of a world at war and became instead the currency of a new age. For Truman, the third bomb remains a decision he never had to make, and that may be its most enduring power. It is a question without an answer preserved in the space where history swerved toward surrender instead of escalation. And for Niigata, for Tokyo, for the countless lives that would have been reduced to names in casualty tables and sticks of charcoal in blasted streets, the third bomb is something they never saw, never heard, never felt. Their survival is measured in absences. No flash, no cloud, no roar. Just another day of hunger, grief and uncertainty, but also of buildings still standing and streets that can be rebuilt. If you close your eyes and listen to those August days of 1945, you can hear the roar of B-29 engines, the crackle of urgent radio messages, the rustle of paper in rooms where men trace circles on maps. You can hear the Emperor's recorded voice and the cheers in Times Square. Somewhere behind all of that, quieter but just as real, is the sound of something that does not happen. A mission not briefed, a bomb not loaded, a target city that remains only a name on a list. The third atomic bomb was ready to enter the story of war. Japan's sudden decision to surrender wrote a different ending instead, leaving that weapon perched on the edge of history, a reminder of how thin the line can be between what did happen and what almost did.